Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. And this is The Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill has brought a big, beautiful opportunity to Second Amendment advocates by zeroing out the tax on certain guns and accessories mandated by the National Firearms Act. This controversial legislation raises a crucial constitutional question. Since a zero tax generates no revenue, is it a tax? Well, there's a lot to unpack here with this provision, and outside Second Amendment groups are already plotting on how to proceed. Mr. John Clark, put that lawyer hat on and tell us what this is for all the regular folks. What's it mean for us?
Well, what it means for it's actually a very interesting legal question. Maybe I'm just a lawyer geek in this, but the National Firearms Act, which I believe was originally enacted in 1934, was basically trying to do an end run around the Second Amendment. And it said, well, we're not actually regulating your weapons. We're just putting a tax on them. And so Congress has the power to enact this law under its taxation powers. And basically that was used to pass constitutional muster. And that was specifically as applies to what are called Title II weapons, which are machine guns and sawed-off shotguns and the other things that we might remember as like Al Capone's weapons of choice. It has been refashioned in various ways, most recently and thoroughly in 1968. But if, in fact, you reduce the tax down to $0, it's $200 a weapon, which, as Mr. Fight pointed out in a recent article about the subject, at the time, that was an astronomical sum. That would be like $4,500 today in a tax. It also, by the way, requires you to have an FFL license, a federal firearms dealing license, which has a lot of strictures on it as well. So Type 2 weapons are generally only rarely found and owned in America because they're very expensive, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get them. And that was all done through the pretense, because it really was a pretense, of a taxation power. So if there's no tax, how can you allege that Congress is applying a constitutional power that it is granted to tax things? So that's why gun rights people are jumping on this as we might say a removal or loosening of that loophole. It's kind of really getting rid of one, not creating one. And then it opens questions, as Jim addressed in his article, about how you can find yourself within or without these classifications based on what type of gun parts you use in a gun, and the whole assault weapons discussion. And so that, I think we'll be seeing more of this issue.
Yeah, John's referring to Jim Fight, who wrote an excellent article on this, going through every little nook and cranny. You can find it on libertynation.com. But yeah, look it up if you want more information, or you can just listen to us for 10 minutes or so. Anyway, all right, guys, I know everybody's got an opinion on this, and so just jump in, let's talk.
I will start right away. Then I'll say first, if you read James' excellent article, and John alluded to it. It says here, quote, adjusted for inflation, $200 in 1934 had the buying power of $4,782 today. That just shows how the Federal Reserve has destroyed America's purchasing power. I would also say that this is further proof that Roosevelt is one of the worst presidents of the 20th century. He was the icon of not letting a crisis go to waste. This is further evidence. Like you look at the year before this NFA, he had the Gold Confiscation Act, and he took everyone's gold because he wanted to change. There was a whole current situation. You can read. I've written on this. You can read on libertynation.com. In Roosevelt's case, the crisis was the Great Depression, and he used every tool at his disposal to make America progressive. And he was Woodrow Wilson on steroids at the time. So James Fight, excellent article. James Fight, I love you, man. That's a great article. I loved it.
I thought there was an interesting. There is an interesting similarity actually between the National Firearms Act and the Affordable Care Act, because, both of those things sought to impose unconstitutional conditions on American citizens. In the case of the National Firearms Act, you are basically telling people what kind of firearms they are not allowed to own. And that, of course, is clearly unconstitutional. There was never any, despite what Democrats even to this day love to say, oh, back then you couldn't own a cannon. Yes, you could. You could own a cannon. If you could afford one, you could get your hands on one. You could own a cannon. There is no, in the Second Amendment, there is no buts. There is no caveats. There's no asterisks. There's no exceptions. Oh, your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, except for machine guns. Of course,
for what we come up with.
But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the National Firearms Act was clearly unconstitutional. The Affordable Care Act was, because it is unconstitutional for the federal government to force you to buy a product. And so what did they do? What did they do for Obamacare to get it through the Supreme Court? The Obama administration lawyers, even though they'd been telling the public, no, this is not a tax. This is not a tax. What did they do? They went in front of the Supreme Court and they said it's constitutional because it's a tax. And, Chief Justice John Roberts agreed with that. And that's how Obamacare came into being, similar thing to the National Firearms Act, really. And that's it's a sneaky way of doing, as somebody said before, an end run around the Constitution by saying, oh, well, this is a tax.
I think it's important to realize that this is part of the big, beautiful bill, and it eliminated the $200 registration fee altogether. Where it fell short was when they tried to say that it took precedence over the National Firearms Act, and the parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, and this is where the tax issue comes in. Elizabeth McDonough disallowed it because it was a policy, quote, policy issue, and not an issue that was appropriate for the reconciliation bill. But then you're talking out of two sides of your mouth. Either it's a tax bill or it's not. And so she kind of had her cake and ate it too, because they got rid of the $200 registration fee.
And I'm just curious as to where we're going to go with this. As people just are lining up, the gun rights groups are lining up to attack this. And I mean, John, what are they gonna do?
Well, I think another underlying issue here is that the NFA allowed them not only to tax weapons, but to register them, which has generally been a big frontline battle for gun rights groups, is that the government is not supposed to be regulating what guns we own, because that's infringing. And a gun registry is the first step towards a gun confiscation. So this was a backdoor through which the government was essentially registering, not in the name of tracking your guns, but of tracking your tax payments, kind of like, a tax return. So I think that also may be a frontline offense because, or battlefront, because these groups will try to preempt, if you will, the government from continuing to track these purchases. And yes, it'll create another huge political battle as the left says, oh gosh, everybody's buying a bazooka now. There aren't a lot of them in circulation anymore. But as Graham says, if you lift the tax limitation and you, the $200 tax was no longer, given inflation, as Andrew pointed out, no longer the hurdle that it had been in the 1930s. But the registration requirement and jumping through the hoops of being certified as an FFL license holder and paying for that license and all these other things are incredibly burdensome. So I think the lawsuits will be centering on eliminating those accoutrements of the bureaucracy.
Go ahead, Graham.
I was just going to say, I think John's right. I think it is only a matter of days now. If the whole battle over the NRA, the NFA itself really heats up, and gun rights groups try to get rid of it, it's going to be a matter of hours before you see Democrats saying, but you'll have 18-year-olds walking into gun stores and walking out with machine guns,
And nuclear warheads. But warheads will be common in most backyards now.
Remember, I gotta put my bazooka under my bed.
There's two reconciliation bills to go and one rescission bill. There's still time.
There's still time. Guys, you have brought such a great insight, comparison, contrast. This was great. Thank you so much for following what's been going on and tuning in with Jim every now and again. You can't close the barn door after the horses charge out for those greener pastures. We'll be watching and reporting next steps. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.